I'm going to do a book review about a Japanese woodworking book. This is Japanese Woodworking Tools, Their Tradition, Spirit, and Use by Toshio Odate. This is the definitive book on Japanese tools and Japanese woodworking techniques. This is something that has gained popularity over time in the Western world. But there are some fantastic ideas and philosophies in Japanese woodworking that form the perfect yin to the Western woodworking yang. This is just a beautiful way of looking at what the techniques are in Japan and trying to use some of those techniques because they're very elegant in some of their ways. Most of Japanese technology, and by technology I don't mean video games and electronics, but technology as in metal and tools, that came from China, and then Japan had their own way of optimizing them, possibly because of the few resources they had and the heavy demands on art and expression that they had as a part of their culture. The Edo period in Japan is the part that is mostly glamorized, but there was woodworking all across. I'm going to read a quick paragraph from this book. While returning from a seminar in Atlanta, Georgia recently, the word shokunin came to mind. This Japanese word is defined by both Japanese and Japanese English dictionaries as craftsman or artisan. But such a literal description does not fully express the deeper meaning. The Japanese apprentice is taught that shokunin means not only having technical skill, but also implies an attitude and social consciousness. These qualities are encompassed in the word shokunin, but are seldom written down. So this is saying that there is a lot of emphasis on not just the work you're doing right now on your workbench, but also the greater effect on the greater world around you. And that is a very interesting consciousness that I see sometimes is not a part of the Western woodworking culture. It only exists in small pockets, and usually it's an expression of a person or the woodworker themselves, not of the general community. The Japanese woodworking techniques were really humbling to me, because here I am building this massive workbench, 8 foot by 3 foot and so tall, 500 pounds. And then there are the Roubo benches that are even more heavy, more intricate to make, pioneered by the French André Roubo. But when you look at a Japanese work area, it's kind of funny. This is their workbench. They sit on the floor. They use a stop. They plane towards themselves. They use a stop to plane against. They use their legs as a vise to just stand up when they have to saw something. It is a very compact area. The shokunin sits in the middle, and his tools are right here with his toolbox, and this is his workbench. And they rarely use clamps. It's just a very, very elegant and simple way of woodworking. And we all know that some of the woodworking that comes out of Japan, especially from the Edo period, are just fantastic in terms of its accuracy and attention to detail. So in this book, Toshio Odate, who was an apprentice to his father, who was a woodworker in Kyoto, I believe, talks about the process he went through from being an apprentice to being a shokunin. And then going to job sites, and what the philosophy was for the woodworker at that time, because they were apprentices who would show up at somebody's house to make either the sliding doors or whatnot. Anyway, so he goes into a lot of detail about this, and he goes into a lot of detail about the tools that he uses. So this is a book really just about woodworking tools, but there's a lot about the Japanese philosophy that I find really, really interesting. I think you will too. He talks about the workshop, the marking tools, saws, chisels, planes, and so on. And each of these things have been mastered and mastered. Each of these tools have been mastered and mastered over time to where they are simple, they're elegant, and they are just fantastic in the way they do the work. Here, let me show you one of these things. So this is This is just unbelievable to me. Watch this. So this is a Japanese saw that was used to mill wood from trees into slabs. And in this piece, Toshio Odate talks about a saw, or talks about an artisan who would mill wood, and he would mill it so well that you rarely had to plane it. I mean, just thinking about somebody who is just milling wood, knowing that it is going to be finished plane later on, but still mills it to such a perfection that nobody has to think about having to plane it too much. It's twist free and whatnot. It's just unbelievable to me. There's an attention to detail and a pursuit of quality that I am very inspired by. So I find this book highly complementary to what I'm doing here. This book helps me stay focused on the fact that I can find quality in few things, and I can build that up with just a few things instead of just acquiring new things to find quality in my work. I think that is a really important thing to find, to learn to understand. Let me read another thing about this chisels. Chisel makers descended mostly from ancient sword makers. When the samurais stopped being as prominent in Japan, the sword makers started finding other work, and woodworking started becoming, art started gaining popularity, and woodworking gaining popularity, and the ancient sword makers started making chisels. Here he talks, as he's talking, so this is the funny thing, right? He's talking about chisels, but he's talking about the chisel maker, and there's 2 pages, 3 pages of information about a chisel maker and his life. It's just fantastic to be able to have that kind of knowledge and be able to read that. So this is a chisel maker. His name, and I may be butchering this, but his name is Chiyozuru Korehide, and he talks about how apprentices were rarely assigned to their father as a master, but because sword making and plane making had so much secrecy by the particular sword maker or plane maker, on the techniques of metal folding and whatnot, that this was sort of apprenticed within the family. So Chiyozuru Korehide apprenticed his own son Taro, and to be an apprentice for something as precise and important as working with metal and getting metal really hard, sharp, but also flexible, requires a very high level of discipline. So here's a quote, because what happened is Chiyozuru Korehide's son became a very renowned, was trained by him, and then he became a very renowned blade maker, and then he passed away at a young age. Chiyozuru Korehide, expressing remorse at his harshness, because he was harsh to his son, wrote an inscription on Taro's Paulonia plain box. Paulonia is a kind of wood in Japan, which is very popularly used to make boxes. He wrote on that box, "I hold the tears, and without mercy I was hard on him." I mean, that immense amount of sorrow. So this is kind of how far I reached. I was reading about chisels, and then there's quite a bit more. But again, they all go into the kanas, the planes, marking tools, sharpening stones. They go into all that in high level of detail in this book. And here's the feathering the blade technique that I was kind of doing, because that gave me the convex camber on my chisels, but this is kind of what he's doing here. Anyway, so a very, very interesting book, very, very knowledgeable book. Read it again. Definitive book about woodworking is woodworking tools, Japanese woodworking tools. My only foray into Japanese woodworking tools are my are some of my saws. I haven't bought any chisels or anything yet because I'm starting off small, so I just got what I found inexpensively, which are my Narix chisels. So these work for now. Using a kanna or the Japanese plane is very, very challenging if you don't know what you're doing. The settings are very precise. They do a better job at planing. They just take a lot sometimes. If you don't know what you're doing, they just take a lot. It can be frustrating. So I opted to go with the regular Stanley, tried and tested workhorse. But I definitely see myself going into the realm of Japanese woodworking maybe in 5-10 years from now, if I feel like I'm ready for it, if I feel like I need that extra challenge. But till then, I got plenty on my hand with building this workbench. The video on the workbench comes out every Monday, and here's the subscribe button so you don't miss those videos. And I will see you on Monday.